When I was growing up, I loved horror movies. I got into creatures because I was just such a monster geek. I just saw all the horror films. I loved them. The Outer Limits really influenced me a lot. The Sixth Finger, David McCullough was in. A futuristic makeup John Chambers had done. Rick Baker was just starting. Dick Smith was a big icon of mine. When I got into high school and college, I started doing some makeups on myself. I was in like The Wizard of Oz. I did this Tin Man makeup, built the whole suit and makeup and everything, and everybody was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. I had no idea what I was doing. Then I started doing all the theater at Cypress College, and I did I think about 200 plays through all of it. I was just aging people and character makeups, and I think that's where I really got good at it. And I always thought, that's where people should start in theater, because you have to really learn how to paint. So as I went into film, that character really helped me. So in 1976, I started with Rick Baker. He'd seen some of my work, really liked it a lot. About a month after I met him, he hired me on to help on The Fury and The Incredible Melting Man and some fun stuff. It was an exciting time in '76 because that's just when special makeup was starting.
At the moment we were preparing Lost Boys, there were a lot of very successful movies at that moment that it was sort of everyone had discovered prosthetics, and so people were doing very, very elaborate prosthetics in all kinds of movies. And we started off, I think, thinking we were going to do that also. It felt to me that every time we do that, it looked like prosthetics, that we were going to be gluing all this stuff on people's faces.
Somebody else was doing the film, and they weren't happy with it, and they asked me to do a test. Same time these other people did a test. And Joel was very specific about what he wanted. He wanted a very sleek, aerodynamic look to him, but he was also using all these actors who were really young, model-looking, good-looking kids. So he didn't want to make them look like monsters, but he wanted something, So I came in and did a test, and it was a very exaggerated test of what's in the film. It's much more stretched out face, but it still looked good in that. And I know I'd seen the other tests, and they had taken him and made him into a real monster horror thing, and it wasn't very attractive. So when I was finally hired on the film, they had 2 weeks into shooting. So in like 2 or 3 weeks, they're going to start shooting these makeups, and I'm like, oh, jeez. And I had designed the makeup because I wanted the contact lens to be the main focal point. I designed these beautiful lenses from Nissel, Dr. Greenspoon made. Back then, contact lenses weren't used that much. They weren't that good quality. There were no soft lenses, big ones. So at the time, you didn't use lenses that much. Like The Exorcist were tiny corneal lenses and very painful to wear because they were glass, So that's why in this film I really wanted to use these lenses and make it the focal point, because at the time they hadn't been used. Like today you can get all kinds, TV shows, they just have these right and left putting in all kinds of lenses, and they're everywhere. But that was very important that lens be so critical to me, that was the makeup.
But these were glass eyepieces that cover the entire frontal area of the eye underneath the lids, and they're extremely uncomfortable to wear. They were developed by the British during and after the First World War for parachuting out of planes or something, so you don't have to wear goggles. And they're the only ones that make them. But because they're glass, you can put in a prescription and paint them and do all kinds of stuff.
But we actually had to numb our eyes to put those in. We could only wear them for about 3 or 4 minutes at a time because they were impermeable. So no oxygen could get into your eye, and they would start to dry up. And so we would be hanging upside down 40 feet from the top of one of those stages. And even that process, just to get you up there, took a certain amount of time. So you could really only shoot for 4 or 5 minutes, and then they'd have to lower you back down.
I had this picture of this tennis player I had saved for years. It was faded. It's just a really contrasty picture, and it gave him this really weird bone structure look. And I always thought, you know, so one day I'm going to use that. So I pull that out, and it's kind of similar what is in The Lost Boys, even though I stylized it a lot more. But Kiefer, to age him a bit, because he was so young looking, he had a beard, so I had to work around the beard. So I did these little cheekbone pieces, and then I did the forehead piece that really gave him the evil look coming down onto the nose. But it was a very stylized, simple look, but I really wanted them to look young and sexy, even though it was a kind of a very demon, evil look. By moving their forehead and face, they could really contort it to make it look evil, or they could look, you know, still look good. Like the teeth. If I put the teeth out on where they usually go, it was very typical, and I tried to do things different. So I moved them into the second teeth and made them like little pearl type, very clean, so it was more of a hip, sexy look. It's funny, at the time, I didn't have like assistants or anything, so I was running the foam, I was sculpting it all, I was making the molds. We didn't know how much it was going to work in the film, so it was, and luckily it ended up working a lot. They loved the makeup. And Joel, I remember walking on set one day, and Joel, because I didn't know, you know, still what was going on in the beginning, and Joel said, you know, we're really happy with it. We can get this close on them, and they look incredible. And it's working, and I was like, oh. You know, it was very scary coming in 2 weeks after they started shooting with no makeup, and I was just thinking, how scary was that for them? They have no look to these things, and they already had to start shooting. Those pieces were so tiny, I didn't even know if they're going to show up or be worth it, but I was amazed how much of the bone structure in their faces had changed. I mean, you see that, and it looks like they're wearing a lot of makeup, but you see the foam pieces in that, they're so tiny. I mean, it's a little tiny piece here, and then just a really thin forehead, but it looks so much more on film. The other thing I really liked that we designed on it were the feet, and you don't get to see it too much in the film, but that's the kind of stuff I like doing. I took their feet and then I did like a hand on it, so when they're upside down hanging, it was a combination thing, but it looks like a foot, but it looks like a hand, because I want to do like this weird organic bat, human-looking foot. I was real happy with that. It's those kind of things that I get excited about when I'm able to design something no one's seen before, but it's very organic. I usually design things in 3D on an actor's face because it's the only way to do it. You can draw whatever you want. Doesn't mean it's going to work as a makeup. So I always insist on getting the actor's face and completely designing it, take it in. That's what I did with these makeups. I would take them in, show them to Joel. But I remember taking in this bust of Ed Herman's makeup, and it was pretty evil. It was really old, very evil, and I toned it down a lot for the film, but I really liked the design a lot. And Ed Herman's makeup was hard to do. His face is kind of, you know, everyday man, just a great face, but it was so hard to try to make him look demonic.
I've read that Greg saw me as something of a challenge because he had to make me sinister, and I'm such a benign creature, funny face. But I didn't see any problem. I mean, I'd done a lot of prosthetic makeup before, so I was girding myself for these hours in the chair. But what he came up with was pretty bizarre. I liked it. It was unusual. It wasn't your typical stuff. We experimented with some other stuff that was cut. I don't know how it didn't work right or something, where he begins to burn from the inside out. The skin explodes outward, and they put these pieces on, and the skin is charred and all that stuff. And inside, they have a material that will reflect a certain light that they punch in, so it looks as if it's flaming from the inside out.
We built this huge puppet that we worked from the back when he's screaming, a real elaborate puppet, but they cut all of that out, which was too bad. Kiefer, I took a cast of him with his eyes open. Dick Smith has done that, and I did it, and I don't recommend anybody doing this. You really have to know what you're doing and have an optometrist helping you. But by putting in these hard lenses with drops, you can take a face cast with the people with their eyes open. And Joel was very adamant about showing when Kiefer went back onto the horns that it'd be a full shot. So we did this elaborate puppet of Kiefer, and it was all radio control. It was great. And He could scream and move and his eyes opened wide, and it was amazing how much it looked like him. And we did it with this big rig where the body'd slam down, the things actually went through him, and he was like screaming. And then when I saw the film, they just did a close-up and, you know, cut it out. Billy Wirth, when he dies death by stereo, we built this elaborate body, and they charged it where the flames blew up out of his mouth as his head exploded. The other thing was very elaborate was when Brooke got it in the tub and melted. We did variations of makeup where he was being eaten away by the holy water, but then I came up with this way, and it worked pretty good, except there was a problem. But I did his whole face, I did in styrofoam. I had molds, these huge metal molds made, and did his face in styrofoam screaming. And we filled a bathtub full of acetone and put the wig on, made them all up. And the tests worked great. I mean, the skin just dissolved, and we had the skull underneath that's in the film, so it would all just melt right away to the skull. But when we shot it that night, it was outdoors. It was the coldest night of the year. The acetone was freezing, which slowed it down, and they used a safety solvent, so it didn't eat it quite away, unfortunately. But that was pretty cool, because, man, normally the acetone just completely would eat it away. But very elaborate stuff we did in the film.
It's kind of nice to have done the mechanical way of doing it. Now they can do that CGI and do. But in an odd way, it loses its power, its punch, because you know that, oh, well, they're just generating this stuff. Nobody's suffering. We were suffering.
Michael Chapman, the cinematographer, really knew how to shoot the makeups, and that doesn't happen often. And boy, he did a beautiful job of shooting them.
The trick of shooting makeup is having really good makeup. Alas, I wish there were another trick. Either that, or if the makeup isn't any good, you don't put much light on them, or you use a lot of diffusion, or whatever you have to do. But the real trick is having really good makeup. If you have really good makeup, you can just treat it as though it were a person, and you shoot it. You know, he happens to be a vampire, or he happens to be a werewolf. But otherwise, you shoot him exactly as if he were the guy he was before he was the werewolf.
Joel, knows how to direct a movie like that, and I'm shocked how well it still works. It's just beautiful film still. I'm amazed that at my age now, I'm still working, still getting incredible projects, and that I'm actually still pulling them off pretty good. I don't know where this comes from when I create these things. I do films like The Lost Boys, and then I do Dracula, and I got to do Frankenstein on Van Helsing this year, and I get to do old age makeups, and I just did The White Chicks with the Wayans brothers, which will be hysterical. So every film is completely different. Still today, I'm shocked at how many people, when I say I did The Lost Boys, oh, I love that movie. I'm really happy I got to work on it. It's still one of my favorite films I've worked on.